Welcome to the New York City Bar Association podcast. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the city bar.
This episode is brought to you by the Mindfulness and Wellbeing in the Law Committee. I am Scott Mason hosting today, and I have with me Sara Walsh. Sara, welcome to the show. This is going to be really great.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really happy to be here.
I can't wait to go through what we're going to talk about, which is intuition. What is intuition, and how can lawyers use it in our day-to-day lives and help make our careers more sustainable and generally less damaging to our mental health? This is some really cool stuff.
Yeah, it is really cool. And I'm obsessed with intuition. I think it's the greatest underutilized resource that we all have readily available to us at any given moment that we just weren't taught how to use. To answer your question, let's go ahead and define our terms up front, right? So
just like a lawyer.
Exactly. Just if you were to look in the dictionary, intuition is defined as a knowing without the use of reason, right? So it's an instantaneous knowing of something without doing what lawyers do, which is collecting the facts and analyzing and drawing conclusions. It's just a knowing right away. Now, I like to sort of liken this to an algorithm. So basically what's happening when you look at the neuroscience behind intuition is throughout our entire lives, we're constantly collecting data points and experiences. And it's our brain's way of instantaneously essentially drawing, connecting the dots and drawing and being able to perceive patterns. So, just as an algorithm works and it sort of iterates slightly each time as it picks up more information, you could give an example like you meet somebody and instantaneously you can tell you like them. That's probably because you've met somebody similar to them in the past who you've also liked. And you can sort of quickly pick up on, some of those qualities about them that you liked right away, even though you don't really know this person. That's what I call experience-based intuition. But as a coach and working with my clients, I've also teased out a second kind of intuition as I've experienced it personally, and I see it in my clients, which is an inner knowing, just an inner intuition that is actually based on no discernible data set. A knowing simply because a phrase I often hear is, I just know. And people often doubt themselves and question that because they don't have, and especially as lawyers, we want to have that meaty evidence and data to prove our points because that's how we're trained and that's what's valued in court. But, we're also humans who exist outside of the, rules of law and evidence. And sometimes these inner knowings are actually what's most profound about life. It sort of sits outside of the daily experience and the way we've been trained to think. An example, a very easy one that I give to illustrate this is when I was pregnant with my second child. So when I had my first child, I was pregnant with a girl. And before I had the gender test done and had the answer in the envelope, I was pretty sure it was a girl. I was pretty sure. Had a pretty good feeling. And it was. But when I was pregnant with my son, I knew in my bones it was a boy with absolute certainty. I can't explain it. Obviously I had a 50-50 chance of being correct, but it was more, it just felt different. It was more than that. And if I had given birth and someone handed me a girl, I would have handed her right back and said, you've got the wrong kid. Like, this is not my child. So it's those kinds of knowings that really feel profound and special.
How do you differentiate that sort of knowing from just a sense of certainty that's based on the desire to be right or the desire to reinforce a preconceived notion that we have or a wish that we might want to have? I, for instance, know someone who was on a major American TV reality show, and she was convinced that she was going to win it. Now, Actually, she did. So one could
Wow.
argue, yeah. So one could argue that she was really experiencing intuition, but maybe it's just that, there was a 1 out of however many contestants chance there was, 18, let's say, that
Mhm.
she would win. The odds weren't that bad against her. And this thing that she was experiencing as intuition was really just a strong desire that she had somehow cemented. Is there any, there might not be evidence behind whether it works or not, but is there any neuroscience that might explain this? Or is it truly something that's part of the human condition that one of those things we just don't know an answer to?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and there is a lot we don't know. I mean, as you can imagine, there has been some scientific study, and there are actually some research papers out there that are credible and really interesting, but there isn't a lot of like big pharma funding behind, researching intuition. I will say though that it's a bit of an interesting inquiry into chicken and an egg, right?
Mhm.
So was it that she knew she was going to win it? Simply because she happened to know. And I just want to be really clear here, especially for purposes of this conversation. We're not talking about intuition as a psychic knowing. We're not talking about intuition as a form of mediumship, which that word can be used in association with those concepts. And no shade to that. That's just not what we're doing here today. But what I do find when I work with my clients and from my own personal experience is that the more we believe our intuition, a few things. The more we listen to it and give it some airtime in front of the mic, the more we can be discerning about whether it's intuition or wish fulfillment, for instance, right? There is a subtlety there. And that's a really internal inquiry that we have to make. And it may be hard to recognize if that's what's happening with somebody else. But discernment can start to happen. But the other thing that can happen is we gain confidence. And it's possible that the intuitive sort of, I call it for shorthand, intuitive hit, right? That knowing that she had that I'm going to win this fueled her success. Maybe she got up there less nervous and was able to access her prefrontal cortex more easily with all the answers, to this game show. Or she was just able to stay calmer and more centered and more clear-eyed. Maybe it's what propelled her to prepare with, more certainty that this was in the bag for her. And actually, if you'll indulge me, I will actually give a very brief anecdote that, when I studied for the bar exam, I went into studying for it with zero confidence. I had a really hard time in law school for a number of reasons. I had a lot of, self-sabotaging behaviors. It just wasn't a place where I thrived. And so I went into studying for the bar exam really with zero belief that I was going to pass it. And I started having panic attacks that I'd never had before in my life. It was a very, very hard time. But what started happening out of nowhere, I had no background in this stuff at the time. I started to occasionally close my Barbary book and just close my eyes. And I could picture my name on that list, the list that they publish in New York
Yeah.
who had passed the bar. And, oh no, sorry, I'm telling it incorrectly. That's how typically you find, so you typically find out whether you pass the bar by getting a personalized email. And then they publish the list. And I started out visualizing my name on that list. And then it occurred to me shortly before the bar exam that, oh no, if I pass, I'm going to find out by getting a personalized email. I should have been picturing that the whole time. I was doing it all wrong. And then wouldn't you know, you can look this up in like 2007 when I took the bar exam, before the internet was as sophisticated as it is, the day that they sent out those emails, the whole system crashed. They were supposed to go out. You couldn't log in to access the notification. And so we were all left and then they closed the office for the weekend. So from Friday night to Monday morning, you can imagine thousands of us just like biting our nails.
Torture.
The way I found out I passed the bar was I saw my name on that list.
Oh, come on.
Monday. And I just think to myself, if I hadn't been picturing the way that I was going to pass it, I don't know. That helped me build the confidence that I was lacking. So to what extent was my intuition at play there? It really for sure was, but I can't say, which came first, the confidence, the insight, or the intuition.
Wow, what a story. I love stories like that. But it does take us back to something important that you said earlier, which is that you're not talking about psychic abilities or parapsychology or pseudoscience or anything like that. Because when I think of intuition, that's what comes to mind. And so defining what exactly you're talking about makes a lot of sense. You also raised something that I feel is worth inquiring about a little bit further and may lead even into the next general topic of discussion that I wanted to get into, which is intuition about doom. Do you feel that that intuition only plays out in a positive sense, or does it sometimes play out in a negative sense? Okay, so here's a story that I read that is really wild. A very, very famous female singer who lived in New York in the early 2000s had a really deep sense of intuition about an upcoming disaster, and she wanted her family to leave town for the next week. And the reason the story came out was because the singer was so famous and they refused to do so. And of course, within a few days, 9/11 happened.
Mm.
And who knows whether that was just a lucky, wild sense of doom that she had that happened to play out, or whether she had some sort of intuition that she was connected to that, okay, ultimately ended up relating to something horrible that did happen. None of these things, or whether it was just a pure random coincidence, because I don't ever want to underestimate coincidence. But to the extent that our intuition may connect to the way things play out or the way things happen, is to intuition primarily a positive leading indicator, or can it be a negative leading indicator?
Yeah, such a good question too. Again, there's so much about the brain that we just don't know. And there is a lot of overlap in these concepts. And, when you're talking about that singer, the word that's coming to me is premonition, right? And again, maybe that's just an area of the brain about processing pre-information that we haven't quite identified yet. And so we sort of categorize it into this woo-woo, frankly, like BS category. I don't have the answer to that, but I think when I try to ground these concepts for usefulness for my clients, I tend to categorize intuition into the positive bucket. And I tend to categorize things like what you just described, these sort of life-threatening events, even because you hear these stories about people who don't get on an airplane and then it crashes, as instinct. And I think for purposes of making this useful to people, where there is a lot of sort of gray area and unknowing, I categorize them in these two sort of binary ways to make it accessible and to make it make sense. So if you think about instinct, that is a survival mechanism that we have developed with over, millennia to prioritize singular survival over anything else. Right. And so we are concerned, and this isn't something we do consciously. It's in the autonomic nervous system. We do it automatically. It's one of the body's functions. But if we feel threatened, even certain physiological things in the body will change. So we will slow down digestion. We will activate the cortisol response in the body so that if we need to run quickly from danger, we can do that. And so I tend to think of things like, that are sort of associated with staying alive. Like, 9/11 was a life threat to so many thousands of people.
Yeah.
As sort of categorized in the instinct bucket. And whereas and that's sort of singular survival. Intuition, by contrast, is where I believe the house of creativity is, where connection with others is accessible, where we can, access empathy and see another person's and feel another person's experience. And, it's an abundance mentality. It is a source of confidence in one's self. And it arises when we feel safe, when we don't feel like we're threatened for survival, and when we can let the body relax and let the digestion occur and the sleep occur, and the rest and digest and the things that we need to function optimally and stay in homeostasis.
The adversarial system that our profession operates under is one in which I would imagine at a subconscious, to use your own word, instinctive level, we are acting as though we are under existential threat. Because in a way,
Exactly.
we are. You lose a big enough case, your job could be on the line, or you screw up a brief and your client loses millions of dollars. You might not be working at that firm very long. Or at a minimum, if you lose enough cases, like let's say you're a prosecutor, and we're going to get to prosecutors in particular in a little while, right? If your win-loss record starts to sink too low, I would imagine your chances at promotion at a very minimum aren't going to be improved. So if you are in a field like ours that is founded in and operates in day-to-day a space where the dominant activation system is instinct, how can you even think about moving into the space of intuition?
Yeah. So I think it's really easy to feel like there's no place for the law practice to value intuition, but I actually think it's a not so secret weapon. I think connection in the law system is actually a source of power. And I think, when I was negotiating plea agreements with defense counsel, it was a real, I even had defense attorneys say to me, "It was a pleasure working with you." I was able to see the humanity of their client, right? There's the empathy piece. And I was able to see how the consequences of, their own actions, right, were going to affect them. And if they took a certain plea deal, it would, affect their lives. And an example that's coming to me that's a bit on the extreme end, but, there was a woman who was involved in a big fraud scheme that endangered the lives of citizens in Brooklyn. And she was sort of the ringleader of this conspiracy. And so she was going to do jail time, and she had a young daughter. And, there was this real sort of dilemma in my mind between holding her accountable for threatening the safety and lives of thousands of people potentially, and also knowing that the generational trauma that would occur by her absence for an extended period of time would have on her daughter. And so I think, at the end of the day, it helped to shape the terms of that agreement. And it also just helped to get buy-in from her attorney, because sometimes it's not about going easy on her for that reason. It's just about acknowledging, I see you're scared. I see that your client doesn't want to leave her daughter. And just by acknowledging their humanity can sometimes soften the edges of that necessarily adversarial system. And I'm not saying it's a perfect tool, but it's one that I think is underused. Another example is and I like to joke, I could never have gone into the courtroom and told the judge that I knew the defendant was guilty because my intuition told me. Right?
Yeah.
And disbarred and seen as a crazy person. There was a huge reputational risk there.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I really cared about. And at the same time, it was that same, experience-based intuition, having interviewed hundreds of witnesses, having, done hundreds of proffers with defendants, where I had a good BS meter. I had a very instinctual way of knowing, or intuition way of knowing, whether the defendant was being forthcoming or the witness was being forthcoming, or, I did these sprawling fraud investigations. And so often I'd be, sort of buried under thousands of documents in response to subpoenas that I'd sent out. And it was a very useful tool for knowing how to optimize my limited amount of time in sifting through and knowing which thread to pull or which direction to focus my efforts on.
So I'm hearing two different situations that, to my eyes and ears at least, point to two different practical situations in which being aware of the existence of intuition as a tool and then applying it may actually help lawyers day to day. First of all, it can be very easy to forget that a large part of being a lawyer is negotiating. I
Yes.
started out my career as a litigator, and the attitude that my superiors had at work, as well as many of my colleagues, and that I adopted at least initially, was that litigation is a zero-sum game. And
Mhm.
I brought that approach into negotiation. So I
Mhm.
negotiated from this very hard, dominance assertion oriented way of being. And later, when I went into business, I took that into a lot of my negotiations. One of us is going to win this negotiation and get what we want. One of us isn't. What you're saying, and I eventually figured it out, not as quickly
Mhm.
as it sounds like you did, but I eventually did figure it out, which is that applying empathy, thinking about the person that I am negotiating with versus against, even if it is within an adversarial setting like a plea arrangement, can open the space for intuition to begin to help guide. And so moving from a negotiation setting, purely a zero sum game, hard-nosed bulldogish way of being, into, okay, is there a space for my intuition to play out and lead to a more successful outcome that will make it easier for all of us involved and speed it up, is one concrete takeaway that I'm hearing. And then number two, when it comes to situations like the second one that you described, where you are
Doing the
thinking,
investigation and
yeah, like where you're trying to apply actual experience to make decisions about how you're going to proceed. Well, if you have a lot of experience, maybe not looking at the experience and sitting down and wasting your mental energy on, okay, let me go through every single case that I ever handled and see whether 60% of them had XYZ factors leading to ABC outcomes, but thinking, okay, my intuition, my brain has collected data. Maybe my intuition is a way of easily aggregating it to be more productive. And productivity and efficiency is something that I would feel any attorney would want. We're all too busy, especially if you're working under a billable hour system, to not want to be more productive. So that's practical application number two. Am I making sense? And do you think that my own intuitive understanding of what's really a way that this could be applied in day-to-day life is on target?
oh, completely, completely. You've summarized it better than I said it. But yeah, another way that I think intuition and instinct sort of play in the law profession is um, a matter of, and I think this is true, and maybe I'm just speaking from personal experience, but actually I know this to be true. A lot of attorneys when they're first starting out, and even it plagues them through their careers, is things like perfectionism, things like imposter syndrome. These are coping mechanisms that drive and fuel us for success, and they're often behaviors that we see in highly driven and demonstrably successful people. But because we're never perfect enough, we have to read the brief 100 times before we can submit it, to the point where we're physically exhausted, or feeling like we're in a conference room and we can't speak up because the imposter in us believes that we don't deserve to be there, and so we can't be as effective and successful. These are ways in which we can benefit from activating and leading from our intuitive voice more so than our instinctive voice, because instinct is a driver. It is fueled by cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that we need to. It's literally what wakes us up in the morning, and it's what keeps us up at 3 a.m. when we're reading that brief 100 times. But too much of it will lead to burnout. Too much of it will lead to mental and physical health problems. And if we can switch into our intuitive voice, which is that voice that can sort of, again, soften the hard edges and say, maybe reading it 80 times is enough and we can get to sleep. Or maybe if I take a chance and I pipe up at the meeting, actually my voice will be valued and I might have an insight that nobody else thought of. And also that same intuitive voice is wise enough to know, even if I say something and it doesn't work out, if nobody thinks it's a good idea, I'm going to be okay. That sense, it's really rooted in a sense of safety versus fear of losing, credibility or being seen as less intellectual, or frankly, like at the end of the day, as you said, being out of a job, having that knowing that, okay, even if doomsday scenario, worst case, I lose my job, I am resourceful. I will find something else. I will be okay.
That intuition that either enough is enough and I can move on now in the case of the brief or a contract review or something like that, or the intuition that this thing that I'm feeling inside needs to be said. It's hard to describe how impactful that could be. Again, going as to productivity, mental health, the ability to successfully navigate the job, to not be seen as neurotic. When I was supervising other attorneys, of course, I would want the appropriate level of due diligence to occur when it came to the work that they provided me and that I would provide to the client. So they needed to do their research. They needed to have double checked it. They needed to proofread what they put together. They needed to make sure that their arguments made logical sense and were applicable to the client's needs. But after a while, I also needed the documents to be done.
Right.
And it's not helpful if one is caught in this reactive, instinctive place to such an extent that you can't move forward. So what I'm hearing is, with regards to particularly things like document review or projects that you're working on, okay, if my intuition is saying I've done all the due diligence and all the review that I need to do, enough is enough now. Maybe it's time to shut off the instinctive fear and just get the thing where, press that email and send it. And then I'm also hearing, again, listen to your intuition, follow it when it comes to speaking up at a meeting or giving a presentation in front of your colleagues. You're right. You might make I cannot tell you how many times once I began to listen to my own intuition and speak up in meetings, I said something that I thought sounded ridiculous or that I assumed everyone would think was absurd. And then people would later say, oh my God, thank goodness you said that. I was wondering that whole thing. I was just afraid to say anything. That comes with, on my end, having learned gradually the hard way through a lot of mistakes to follow my intuition. And those folks maybe could potentially benefiting from following the intuition. I also think when it comes to the latter example that you're talking about, another area that I really want to know your thoughts on, which relates to office politics and career navigation in legal settings. Being successful, law firms or government agencies or nonprofits or corporations of your in-house counsel, a lot of moving up isn't just being able to argue every one of your adversaries out the door and win every case and write the best briefs. You have to actually get people to not hate you.
Yeah.
Your career is usually better off if people are rooting for you as opposed to rooting against you. So how does intuition play into emotional intelligence and greasing the social wheels that we all have to operate if we're living in any sort of organizational context?
Yeah, it has so much to do with what you're talking about. I had a client who was a sort of young, not an attorney, but she was a young ingenue and she was tapped to lead an office. And she was, the supervisor for a lot of people who were older than she was. And so she had a lot of self-doubt. And as we worked together and excavated her intuitive voice, which enabled her to sort of embolden her confidence in herself and see her strengths, she said, I had somebody come to me, one of my employees, and he was very critical of me. And instead of receiving that as confirmation of all of the terrible things I already think about myself, my intuition in her, we hear these voices in our heads, right? We all have different voices in our heads. She's like, I heard my intuitive voice saying, he's the one who's scared. He's the one who's feeling threatened. And this is just his style of communicating that to me by trying to diminish me. And so she was able to have that sort of elevated EQ to recognize the dynamic of what was actually going on. And I think, that fear, right, was his instinct, his fear of survival, his fear of being seen for, I don't know, not doing a good enough job or whatever it was that he was trying to get ahead of. Being able to recognize that in other people is so powerful, because then we can connect with them. We can have empathy for them, even if they're the ones coming to criticize us. And then we can see what their needs are. And as leaders, try to meet those needs and say, if what I think you're saying to me is you're afraid that this project that I've assigned you isn't going well, let's sit down and talk about it. Let's identify, your job is not at risk here. Here are the things I value in you and why I need you on this team. And, let's try to rework what's not going well. Those are the qualities in leaders that emerge when they can lead from their intuitive voice. I always say I'm an intuitive leadership coach. I help my clients lead from intuition, not from their inner critic, right? The inner critic would say, here I have a subordinate who's criticizing me. Who is this guy to come criticize me? Let's get him out of here.
Although you focused in that example on self-doubt, I can't also help but think about that guy that was reporting to her. He may not have, in his own mind, have had self-doubt, but he was also, just listening to it, almost certainly coming from a place of instinct as opposed to intuition. And perhaps I'm hearing from this example that if you are reacting defensively, or if someone is triggering you and you're wanting to act aggressively, and I have a tendency to be this way, so I'm not talking from
we're all human.
Right? Which is maybe take a step and say, okay, I'm acting aggressively. I'm wanting to fight. I'm wanting to tear this person down. I'm wanting to do whatever that's hostile or needlessly adversarial. I'm not adversarial in the courtroom when you need to be adversarial, but adversarial with your boss you don't need to be adversarial with, and saying maybe, okay, I should look as to whether reaching into my own intuition can guide me, as you mentioned earlier, into a more creative way of managing myself.
Yes.
So that I don't end up, again, being someone who gets written up for insubordination or gets a reputation as being difficult to work with, because that ain't a good thing to be.
Exactly. I was thinking as you were asking that question, I just think that intuition is such a powerful way to elevate our EQ. And, there's this term around this type of skill set as soft skills, right? These are communication, empathy, leadership. These are things that are seen as soft skills, which I think in the right workplace are valued, but even the sort of name or the designation of them as being soft somehow devalue them. But I actually think they are just as valuable, if not maybe even more so than, technical skills, right? Of course, we need to know how to write briefs and all that thing. But to understand the workplace dynamics, we need to understand, okay, Kathy is in burnout. What are her needs? No wonder she's irritable. She hasn't slept in a week because she's been working on this big case that's going to trial. Or, Jonathan is ripping apart. I get back my pleading and it has red ink all over it. I could take that as I'm a terrible writer. He must think I'm an idiot. Or I could notice his anxiety about perfectionism and the belief that if we don't submit a perfect brief, we're not going to win the case. So it really enables a discernment so you can protect your own emotional regulation, but also be able to see the root causes of other people's patterns that cause a lot of strife and stress within the workplace that inhibit our ability to stay satisfied and be successful, no matter how you want to sort of define success.
There is a friend of mine that ran Latin American operations for a major international company who once said to me the following: hard skills are easy, soft skills are hard.
Yeah, I love that. Exactly.
Yeah, let's quote this man for the rest of our lives. These soft
Yes.
skills, these soft skills play out in our larger lives too. How we interact in a work setting may or may not, but many times may reflect how we're interacting in the world. And I want to take a second to point out that when I meet someone on the street at a party, at a networking event, or something like that, I will often ask, who are you? Or tell me a bit about yourself, or what do you do? And the response very frequently is, I am a lawyer.
Mhm.
I am a lawyer is a statement of identity. And
Right.
how, therefore, we identify ourselves would seem to cross the boundary of jobs. If you're saying I am, right, you're not saying I am a father who works as a lawyer. I am working right now as an attorney. I work as a general counsel. When someone says that, people say I am an attorney. And so understanding that identity as a professional and as a outside of our day-to-day job may conflate. Am I correct in hearing then that intuition can also be something that we can practice applying in our non-work lives, and then there might be some bleed over into how we and when we use it, if we use it at all on the job?
100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, any relationship dynamic can be improved through intuition. I'm going to take a minute here to go on my soapbox and say, I do also think outside of the scope of utility within the workplace, I'm just going to say it. I really think it's the solve to the connection crisis that we have right now, right? We're all disconnected. We're disconnected from ourselves. We're disconnected, and therefore we're disconnected from others. If we can't even connect within, how are we going to connect to somebody else, especially somebody else we're having conflict with? We spend our lives in front of screens. We are constantly taking in. There's a constant stream of input. And maybe we don't have great input hygiene, right? We're constantly getting notifications about conflict across the world or tragic death. And our nervous systems were not designed for that. They were not designed to handle that capacity of stress. We were designed to handle discrete stress, like lives being threatened, being chased by a tiger, but not this constant input. And even if it's not stressful input, even if it's entertaining input, if all we're doing is taking in input, how are we clearing space to allow original thought to arise? Where does creativity and innovation come from? These are valuable tools to have in and outside of work, right? Creativity and innovation. And how can that arise if we're just taking in information and data and entertainment? And that's why, that's why we're disconnected from ourselves. And then if we can't feel regulated internally, naturally we're going to be ready to explode if somebody gets in our way and doesn't apologize, or if we're sitting in traffic and we just can't, we're lacking some resilience. So there's a real desperate need right now for looking for all the ways that we can connect internally to protect our mental and physical health, to have idea creation, to have confidence, to have resilience. And then it enables us to be better to our partners, to be better to our kids, to be better to our parents and friends, and especially those who cut us off in traffic, right? Mm-hmm. And so with all of that said, I could give one practical application after another. I've been with my husband for 26 years. I'm 46 years old. That's well more than half my life. We've been through many chapters together. We started as kids. Now we have kids. We've been through illness. We've been through loss. the whole gamut, and we're still working at it. And once I started to see him through the lens of intuition and to be able to recognize when either I'm dysregulated and I'm reactive and I'm based off of instinct because that my instinct is telling me this, this is it. This is finally the moment that our marriage explodes, which not, we're great. But, or I can see from him, he's had a long day, he's been traveling, he's tired, and he's not making the kids lunch. And I get upset, but all of a sudden I can see, oh, he's he has no capacity, right? And I can have some empathy for him, or and those are just sort of some high glossy examples. But yeah, I mean, it's everywhere you look. Once you start to see through this lens, you see it and apply it everywhere.
You mentioned earlier that it's probably best, let's say you are lead counsel in a bench trial, to tell the judge that you should win and that you brought the complaint or whatever initiating document for the adjudication or litigation because of your intuition. Okay.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah. Are there other situations in which you should not be using your intuition? Or if you are uncertain about whether to use it or not, whether you should know whether to, how you should know when to go forward with it or with using that intuition or not?
I like to think of it, I'm hoping this will answer your question, but I like to think of it as a dance. In some ways, almost like a scaffolding. Like if intuition it's sort of necessarily a bit fluid, it has like a fluidity quality to it. It is not so rigid a structure. Then you kind of need a structure around it to contain it. Otherwise, it's just sort of floating around everywhere. Maybe a pool is a better example, right? You have a body of water, you need to contain it. So if the water is the intuition, the edges of the pool are the instinct. You still need instinct. It's going to keep you alive. It's going to keep you driven at work. It's going to keep you sharp and checking and rechecking. Like all of these, qualities are good ones. It's just sometimes, especially as lawyers, we often over-index way into the instinct realm, and then we end up in burnout. But the intuition is sort of the heart of all of it, right? Like, why are we even in this profession in the first place? A lot of us are here because there's some piece of fulfillment within us. We're helping others. We're advocating on behalf of, when I was ADA in Brooklyn, I was advocating on behalf of the people in Brooklyn to keep them safe. Even if you're in litigation, there's usually something in dispute, right? There's a piece of property or something that's in controversy that somebody cares a lot about, and you are their advocate. And advocacy is a really important, fulfilling role to play. So I think in that regard, intuition can be the driver of thinking creatively about how can I win this argument. But then you need the scaffolding of instinct to be able to draw upon the resources you need to stay up late to write the brief, or to, have the technical skills to, do your citations properly or something like that.
You mentioned something in passing that is actually quite consequential, that many, if not most, attorneys end up in the profession because of some bigger than us desire. Mm-hmm. By that, I mean a desire to do something that's meaningful beyond just right, the boundaries of our physical bodies. Right. And many times it is something much bigger. It might be a social justice cause. It might be, as with the case of prosecutors, people who want to ensure that the public is safe. I worked for the city's buildings department many years. I was very heavily motivated by a larger desire to keep the public safe from things like building collapses or plumbing explosions, things like that. And at the same time, many attorneys are deeply dissatisfied with their jobs. And so am I correct in thinking that an additional practical application for the use of intuition and tapping into it might be if you're feeling somehow dissatisfied or uncomfortable with where you're at professionally. It might be, for instance, not just a need for you to move from one job to the next one, but to spend some time with your intuition. In my own practice, I would call it speaking to the inner oracle and thinking, okay, what is it really that I stand for? What is my intuition telling me that I am here to truly serve? Not just what the next job is or what the next opportunity is, but what my unique place is that could bring people to amplify that impact that drove them into the law in the first place even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, fulfillment is the key there. And often, like I went into the practice of law because at the end of the day, am a helper, right? I wanted to help people. And this felt like a really powerful and, frankly, I'll just be honest, prestigious way to do it, right? And my ego needed the prestige and my heart needed the way to help. And I think, what happens is we end up in these jobs often that are very extractive and they take us away from that fulfillment piece. And so, I'm not suggesting that everybody just, quit their jobs and follow their passions, because
of course
we all have bills to pay and maybe, like me, still some student loans to pay off from law school, right? But you really have to work to think about, like, it took me some effort to internal work to figure out that helper piece, even though it's such a basic identity descriptor. But at the end of the day, I want to help people. Maybe for other people, what drew them to the law was they like to problem solve. They love the challenge of problem solving and figuring out, the complex, like putting all the pieces together and then figuring out the best way to advocate for the outcome they want. And so if they're feeling unfulfilled in that particular job, maybe part of it is finding a new job, but maybe it's about asking for cases that are a little bit more complex, or for cases that challenge them in a new way. The underlying subject matter is new to them. And so they have to, like I remember I had a case that, to your point, I had a big plumbing scheme case, and I had to learn all about New York City gas piping. Who knew? That would be fascinating. But, it was it was a new subject matter that I'd never had to learn before. So, there can be ways to access that fulfillment piece. And maybe that means you're, to the extent we have time and capacity and energy, you're volunteering an hour a month or something like that. You feel like that helper again. Or, there are ways to get creative to satisfy the fulfillment that don't require big life shifts, or sometimes maybe they do. And that's also something that's a little bit scary, that, your intuition might be saying, you got to leave this job. And your inner critic or your instinct is like, hell no, there's no way to survive without this job. And so it's a matter of sort of figuring out which one to prioritize.
By the way, if anyone watching or listening to this ever has the intuition that they may want to get involved with the Mindfulness and Wellbeing Committee of the New York City Bar Association, I have to say, please follow that intuition, because I did, and it's been one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. But more practically, well, that's very practical. More to the original question that I asked, what I'm hearing from you, and this goes back to what you said earlier about the dance. If you are unhappy or dissatisfied with where you're at professionally, it could honestly be the instinct that is saying, run and do something else altogether. It might not be that. Have the need that you have, that thinking in an instinctive way can help you with, like, that need to put food on the table. Perhaps dance with intuition that might speak to purpose or connection or what your larger goal is when it came to being a lawyer. And if you can navigate that dance, perhaps some of these solutions to feelings of dissatisfaction or discomfort with your career might come up in a way that's far more creative and powerful. You've done this. You were a prosecutor. How on earth did a hard-nosed prosecutor out there keeping people safe from all sorts of crime and other horrible things in New York City end up talking about intuition? Sarah, there has to be a story here. I need to hear it now.
There's a story. I'll do a very quick version of it, which is I became a lawyer because I wanted a powerful way to help people. And I also, alongside the practice of law, became a certified yoga teacher and mindfulness teacher. And so I started teaching yoga. This was before I had kids, but I started teaching yoga literally mornings, lunchtime class, evenings, and weekends. I couldn't get enough of it. I felt alive and in the flow when I was doing it. And it felt like I was really helping to lift people up. Everybody would come back to me after class and say, like, I feel great now. I came in all stressed and my body feels good and my mind feels good. And I was picking up on that. I was thinking, wow, it feels really good to help people feel good. And maybe there's something here. And my instinct was like, there's nothing here. You can't be a yoga teacher. There's no pay. There's no prestige. Like, what are you thinking? But as the intuition is, it's a quiet voice and sometimes it's hard to hear. But if it really has a message for you, it'll bang that drum louder and louder, right? And so the years ticked by and the drum was banging, but I didn't know how to reconcile those two things. I had law school debt and a mortgage, and I wanted to have kids. Like, I couldn't just, drop everything and become a yoga teacher. So that's where the creativity piece came in. And all of a sudden, my intuition came up with a creative solution, which was, let's take a 2-month sabbatical from work and try and figure out what's next, right? What's next for me in my career? And I took that sabbatical and I was exploring various options, one of which was to start this like online wellness platform. But I realized I'd need like a big tech investor and I didn't really want that part of it. My friend said, you should take a course in coaching, this course that I took. I know you, and I know you're deeply curious about the human experience and helping people. And, I really think you would like this course. And the instinct part of me was like, well, I'm a credentialed attorney. Do you know how hard it was to become a lawyer? Anybody could become a coach. I'm not just going to hang up a shingle and call myself a life coach, because that's the wild west of wellness, right? That's like the snake oil of wellness. These are people who, just didn't want to have to go to grad school to become licensed therapist. I had a lot of really sort of ugly bias against it, but I trusted my friend. And so I said, what the hell? And I took this intensive 3-day course and I came out the other side a changed person. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the people who become coaches are people of integrity, people with really interesting backgrounds, people who genuinely care and want to help others, and that there's a method to it. And that, there can be credentialing if you so choose. And that was important to me. So I started to down the path of credentialing. And that made sense to me. So I'm able to weave together a lot of the yoga and mindfulness and self nervous system regulation and neuroscience that I've learned in my sort of like yoga sphere, and combine it with the rigors of, analytical thinking. When I was a prosecutor, I was trained in knowing how to ask questions that cut right to the heart of the matter and being able to see through all the clutter and all the noise, all of the additional documents, and get right to, here, this is the piece of evidence that proves the crime, right? And in a way, I'm doing that with my clients now. They come in with all these stories and all these reasons and all of these patterns of behavior that have been accrued over a lifetime, and able to cut right through and see, what they really want and what's holding them back. And so that we can activate their intuitive creativity and wisdom so that they can align their actions with their, fulfilling, knowing, wise self. So I got to that tipping point where I said, okay, and just also say, I struggled deeply with imposter syndrome as a lawyer most of my career. And for the first time in my adult career as a coach, I was like, oh, I'm really good at this. I just had a really deep self-confidence that was such a lovely thing to finally arrive at. So I took the leap a couple years ago, and it's been extraordinary.
I can tell there is nothing better than being in your groove and
Yes.
just right experiencing that lightning bolt of flow go right through you and then see people's lives change. I love that you shared all this. And if there is one takeaway that I will remember from this, it is that if you are in a situation in which you feel overwhelmed or reactive, it's not fluff. It's not woo woo junk. It's something that actually works, which is step inside, look at whether you're being activated by instinct or whether you are hearing the voice of intuition. If you're being activated by instinct and your life isn't in imminent danger, consider tapping into the intuition and seeing where it leads you. It might just take you somewhere that you could not have imagined. And it might tap into some creativity that you forgot you had, which can be an amazing place to be. That's practical, and it can be applied in day-to-day situations that all of us face in our jobs, whether it's in the office or in the courtroom. If there is one thing that you would like the audience to take away from this, Sara, or something that you didn't get a chance to say already, what might that be? Please share it with us.
Yeah, thanks. Just to say to sort of recap what you just said, I often frame it like, in any given circumstance, you ask yourself in that moment, do I feel safe or do I feel threatened? Right? And that way you can quickly check in with yourself to know, am I acting from instinct or am I acting from intuition? And the thing that I haven't had a chance to say that I would love the audience to take away with is, it's really hard to access your intuitive voice if you're feeling threatened, if you're stressed out, if you're depleted, if you're in overwhelm, if you're in burnout. And the way to train your intuitive voice to show up, because by the way, we can train this. You can create your own personal method for accessing your intuition at will, so long as you feel safe, versus having it happen when I'm in the shower or, out for a run. Is really it all comes down to mindfulness practices, because those are the activities that will activate your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest, I feel safe mode. So anything from conscious breathing, intentional breathing, yoga, meditation, listening to relaxing music, truly taking a shower. Like, I work from home now, and wow, who knew what a gift it is to be able to take a midday shower, because I actually am able to clear my head, and all of a sudden, like, a great idea will emerge. So, there's a buffet of options out there, and I do want to leave the audience with a very, very, very easy one that can be done. I'm doing it right now, and you can't even tell. You can do it in a meeting. You can do it on the subway. Is rubbing your fingers together very slowly. Just your thumb and your pointer finger is all you need. And you just focus on the sensation of your fingertips rubbing together, and even trying to feel the fingertip bridges. And all this does is it brings us into the present moment. When we're able to focus our attention solely on this, we can't be ruminating about the past, and we can't be anxious about the future. And if you pair it with a deep breath, then what all of a sudden starts to happen, I can see you doing it, with practice, is a Pavlovian response. So if you start to rub your fingertips together, you will naturally take that deep breath. And that deep breath, you don't take a deep breath if you're scared. You take a deep breath when you're at the beach and you're relaxed, right? So if you're in a meeting and you're afraid to say that thing out loud, if you have a couple minutes before the meeting ends, try this. Take the deep breath and see if that can give you a little bit of a feeling of safety to be bold and to be confident.
30-second coaching tip. That's practical. Sara, really appreciate this. I've learned so much from this conversation. I'm sure the audience will too. I just want to take a moment to express real appreciation because my intuition is saying that the advice that you gave folks is going to help a lot of other people out. So thank you so much for being on this podcast episode.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to come back again. The Mindfulness and Wellbeing in the Law Committee has produced other episodes that you can check out, and the Bar Association has a whole host of other podcast episodes on a whole roster of other topics that are associated with the practice of law here in New York City. Until next time, thank you. Come back again.
We're about to do an exercise that will help calm your nervous system and help you tap into your intuitive voice. This is just a first step. It's like doing reps at a gym. So you might not notice any muscle difference after doing this, but if you do it enough, you will certainly see the improvement and the strength in the voice of your intuition. So go ahead and take a comfortable seat. Place your hands on your thighs for now. You can close your eyes if you're in an environment where that feels safe so that you can access your inner landscape more easily. But it's also okay to keep your eyes open. Just try and fix them on a soft point in front of you. I'm going to walk you through a guided meditation or exercise to tap into your intuition. And we're just going to start with some focused breathing in and out through the nose. We're going to take 3 deep breaths and I will guide you through it. So sealing the lips, exhaling everything out. Take a deep breath in through the nose, feeling the chest rise and the belly expand. Full breath out through the nose, feeling the rib cage knit together and the belly contract. Again, inhale deeply with the expansion, trying to sip a little bit more air in from the last breath. And a full breath out, slowly exhaling all of the air out of the lungs. Last one, deepest breath in so far. And a very slow, thorough exhale. And now setting aside any feelings of self-judgment or curiosity that will get in the way of you accessing your intuition. Go ahead and bring your hands to rest on the place of the body where your intuitive voice resides. So this might take some play and some testing out of where the hands want to land. But don't overthink it. Just bring the hands to the part of the body where you think your intuition resides. And if you're finding it hard to land on a certain place, just pick anywhere. Give you another moment to find that place. And once the hands have settled down, we're going to invite the intuitive voice to sort of rise into that area. Might be nice to take a deep breath in here. And a full breath out. And knowing that we are in a private space where the outcome can be anything. There's no right or wrong way to do this. We're going to ask the intuitive voice, now that it's shown up to where the hands are resting, What do I need to know today? That's it. A simple question. Asking the intuition, what do I need to know today? We're going to give some space for that answer to arise. So I'll be quiet for a moment. And sometimes it helps to repeat that question in your mind. Or if you're feeling drawn to any other question, feel free to ask it in this time. Staying steady and deep with the breath, full inhales and full exhales. We'll take one more moment here just to explore whatever answer the intuition might have for us today of what do I need to know today? And before we close, sometimes it's nice to just thank your intuition for showing up if it came. If you heard something, maybe an answer, a word or an insight or idea, but also to acknowledge if perhaps nothing happened and being okay with just taking that first step towards exploration, taking that first rep at the gym, giving yourself some credit for showing up, playing in the sandbox, and being open to what might or might not happen. So we'll take one deep breath to close out together. Again, sealing the lips and exhaling everything out through the nose. Take a deep, full, slow breath in, feeling up and expanding. And a full, thorough exhale out. And when you're ready, you can replace your hands back to your thighs, open the eyes if they're closed. Thank you so much for joining for today's episode and meditation, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New York City Bar Association podcast. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. If you enjoy this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen. Find more City Bar podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeart, or at our website at www.nycbar.org/podcasts. Be sure to check out This Lawyer's Life, a professional development podcast where we talk with lawyers about seizing opportunities, learning lessons the hard way, and about what makes them tick. And don't miss Building Belonging, a podcast that embraces authentic conversations about DEIB solutions by amplifying the most marginalized voices in the legal industry and exploring spaces others dare not. This podcast was produced and edited by Eli Cohen and Jalen Martin.